Hey, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining me for Fridays with Fenning. For those of you who know me, I'm a very proud dad of 3 children, Sam, Alice and Rachel. Being part of their lives as they've grown up has been such a joy for me. To see how each has grown and developed into the brilliant adults that they are has been really interesting because they are so different. Sam has always been very sporty and quite self-contained. He would find it more difficult to share his feelings, but is incredibly compassionate and kind without making a song and dance about it. Alice is probably most like her mum. She's a bit ditzy at times, has a sense of adventure. Her faith has been strong from such a young age, and she's very mature and confident and sometimes scarily impulsive. Rachel is the stubborn one, but now she's learnt to use her stubbornness for good and not for evil. She's always been the most sociable, has known how to work the room, and has learnt an amazing work ethic that makes her, well, I believe, outstanding. 3 children, the same gene pool, the same family, the same upbringing, but very differently wired, and I love that. We are all unique people with different looks, fingerprints, different personalities and temperaments. Our view of the world and how to approach it is done in different ways. Some gain energy from being with people, others find it draining. Some love to talk about their feelings and others like to keep their feelings to themselves. Some like to think big picture, others like to kind of focus on fine detail. Now, none of those approaches are right or wrong, they're just different. It's how God has wired us up to be. Psalm 139 verse 13 says this, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." And that inmost being is more than just our physical body, it's our wiring, our temperament, our strengths. So just as we all relate to the world and other people in different ways, it's logical that we will naturally relate to God in different ways too. You see, to have intimacy with God, which was the theme of last Sunday's talk and Wednesday's Unpacked Lunch, there will be easier ways for us to draw close to God than others, depending on how we're wired. Now, a man called Gary Thomas wrote a book called Spiritual Pathways, and in it he highlights various ways that we most naturally sense God's presence and experience spiritual growth in our lives. And just as I mentioned the 5 love languages last Sunday, over these next 2 weeks I want to highlight the 7 spiritual pathways which I hope will help you find your most natural way to connect with God, especially for times when life is tough and when God might feel distant. So here we go. The first pathway is the creation pathway. Now, before lockdown, I used to head to Costa in Stowmarket to meet with people at 7 o'clock in the morning before they headed off to work. And whether it's because of my farming background or not, I just don't have problems in getting up early, and it often feels like it's the best time of the day. And so as I'd drive, I'd see the sun starting to rise in the sky, a mist hovering over the fields, the light casting long shadows, and I'd just find a smile coming to my face and I'd speak out, "Thank you, God, this is beautiful." Something within my soul would lift and it would remind me of my amazing Creator God, and I'd be drawn closer to Him. Now, does that ever happen with you? Do you naturally feel closer to God when you stare at the night sky or see some incredible scenery or notice a rainbow or watch a barn owl fly low? If so, it's likely that one of your pathways is creation. And if so, lean into it. Go for walks, visit beautiful places, spend time outdoors and allow the God of nature to speak life into your soul through His creation. Create space in your day or your week to connect with Him through the creation pathway. David, the psalmist, would write these words. He said, "The heavens declare the glory of God," because God can be found in the majesty and beauty of creation. Now, this is not everyone's pathway, so don't be shocked if friends don't engage in the same way as you do. And as with all pathways, we do have to be careful not to use this as an excuse not to invest time with people. You know, I've heard people say that my garden is my church. And although I know where they're coming from, usually it's an excuse to get out of meeting in community with others. So don't allow this pathway to isolate you from others, but use it if creation is a pathway for you to naturally sense God's presence and majesty. The second spiritual pathway is the intellectual pathway. Now, these people draw closer to God when they learn more about Him, when they're encouraged to think, to develop ideas and to learn. You know, typically someone with this pathway will come to church and they put up with the music and the videos and all the stuff at the start of the service because they're just waiting until the talk starts. Why? Well, it's because they hear God best when they learn. And if you're recognizing yourself here, you'll love to listen to podcasts and read and study because you want to feed your mind. And as you do so, God feels present and God speaks to you. Now, did you know that in the Old Testament, when the command was given to love God, it was to love God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your strength? And yet many years later, when Jesus quoted that verse, he added, and with all your mind. Now, people with the intellectual pathway just love that. Why? Because when your mind is growing, you feel alive. And just as a person with a creation pathway who can't get outside will struggle, so a person with the intellectual pathway who stops learning stagnates. So it's important to know your primary pathways and use them to help you connect. Now, the danger with the intellectual pathway is that it can sometimes become all about head knowledge and have no heart connection. So you've got to learn in order to worship and have intimacy with God. The third spiritual pathway is the serving pathway. Now, I know several people at the Forge who just love to be involved, who have several roles and they thrive in it. Why? Well, it's because they feel connected to God when they serve and they know that they are making a difference. I mean, have you ever done something for someone else and just felt the smile of God on you? If this is your primary pathway, the answer will be yes. God has wired you to serve and to connect with Him through those opportunities. Now, of course, everyone's called to serve, but this may be your natural pathway of encountering Jesus. And if so, lean into it. You know, you'll have met people with this pathway. It's often those who are happy to serve behind the scenes, not making a big deal out of it, and yet you see Jesus in them. It's beautiful to see. I was reading this week in Acts about a lady called Dorcas. It says about her that she was always doing kind things for others and helping the poor. In other words, it was part of her DNA and how she connected with God. You know, it's easy to become critical about others who are not like us, to think others are lazy as they're not stepping up as freely as you do. Now, it's true that we're all to serve, but we're all to learn too, and we're all to appreciate God's creation. It just comes more naturally to some than others. And people with this pathway can sometimes find it hard just to be, to attend and be part of church without a role. Because when they do, they feel a bit lost and disconnected and God can seem more distant. Now, all these pathways are preferences. We're not limited to one and we need to stretch ourselves by doing things outside of our primary pathways. But we should lean into them because it's how God has wired us. So have I described your pathway yet? Well, if not, don't worry because you can tune in next week for the other 4 pathways. And the purpose of doing this, well, it's to help us understand ourselves better in how we best connect with God. So tune in next Friday at 11. And before that, make sure you join us on Sunday at 10:30 for the second episode of our series called Better Together. You take care and have a great weekend.